Good evening, my fellow infected psychopaths. Today I'll be injecting you with the insanity that is my voice. Let's get started. Anyways, as time went on, I learned more and more about Lego gunsmithing, going from this to this. Along the way, I made two major discoveries and breakthroughs. The first one is a new sling bolt mechanism that I call the split sling bolt. I won't go into too much detail, mostly because I did explain this mechanism heavily in a previously made video. Make sure to check it out, by the way. So, for now, I'm going to give you a brief summary. It works on the same principles as the previously mentioned diagram of the sling bolt mechanism from part 1 of the series. What makes this particular mechanism different is the fact that the bolt is split into two parts. Part 1 is the actual sling carrier, while part 2 is the projectile roof. Both parts uses a metal brass rails for guidance. When part 1 is manually moved, it will eventually collide into part 2. This will move both parts as one, just like in the basic sling bolt diagram. Once both parts reaches a certain point of the weapon, it will push on a lever attached to an armature that will load in a projectile. I should also mention, both parts have a string connected to each other, so when I move part 1, part 2 will follow until the built-in stopping points of the gun will stop part 2 from moving any further. The projectile and sling will get stopped by the trigger until the trigger gets pulled. This sling bolt type is a lot more efficient than the original sling bolt mechanism. Hey, fun has some madness here. There was one more major discovery that I discovered in the years prior to this build. I completely forgot to mention because it was such a minor change in my Lego gunsmithing skills. I discovered if I use copper tape, I can get around having tri-loop wires around moving parts. It was such a minor change in my Lego electrical guns. I completely forgot to mention it. This method is used in a lot of my flywheel Lego guns, and it is going to be used in this particular build and probably in future builds too that requires electrical components. But with that said, back to the video. Another major discovery is a mechanism known as the spring toggle mechanism 4. The reason why this mechanism is key to the success of the electrical system for this weapon is because it solves the dead space issue. Let me explain. As you can see in this animated diagram, there's a lever connected to each other on a single access point. A spring is attached on each end of the lever. When the top lever moves, the bottom lever will stay in place on the left side until the top lever moves away just enough until snap, the bottom lever snaps on the other side. This mechanism is what got me started again on the full auto sling bolt mechanism. Now, while the spring toggle solves the dead space issue, I still needed to figure out how to bring the bolt back and forth. At first, I tried using a long metal bolt to bring in the sling carrier, but like I mentioned in the last video, that gear system is just too damn slow. Not to mention the force of the sling that loops around the sling bolt carrier will literally cause the bolt to push in front of the gun, causing the gun to literally break itself in half. This is a big issue for me. I was on verge of giving up. That was until the great machine god gave me a little blessing. While researching, I managed to stumble across this guy, this scholar of a YouTuber that goes by the name of Harrison Lowe. And just like me, he has a similar problem. However, unlike my smooth spraying problem, he's currently making a robot that juggles. It's a very interesting video, and I'll link his video in the description below in case any of you want to check it out. His robot design needed some arm actuators. The problem is, just like me, using a gear system will be just too damn slow. However, he found a way to make it more efficient and fast. Instead of using gears to move a actuator, He's instead using a string and a pulley system to move the actuator back and forth. Just like last time, I started with a small scale prototype just to see if the mechanism will work for my applications. Just like in Harrison Jugglebot, I'm using string and a pulley system with a spool reel attached to a Lego motor. Now, I could have used a standard DC motor, but honestly, it's a small scale build, it wouldn't be necessary. Since a small scale test showed some fruitful results, I thought I could finally make my dreams of an automatic sling bolt system come true. So, here's the funny thing. When it comes to engineering or anything new for that matter, it's like climbing a mountain. And I gotta tell you, I barely reached the goddamn middle. There were two major problems when it came to implementing this mechanism. The first one was pulling the actual sling bolt back. Remember, the sling loops through the bolt. This same sling will want to move the bolt in the opposite direction. Now, some of you are probably thinking to yourself, okay, so just use a bigger, stronger motor. And that thought did cross my mind, but it's just not that simple. Even if I were to use a bigger motor, I still risk the motor getting overworked, which could lead it to burning out. Remember, the motor is going to be constantly running until I let go of the actual trigger. With that big issue, the idea of giving up was very tempting. Very tempting. But somewhere in my deranged, insane mind, I felt like I was onto something. I felt like I was on the right track. So I researched, and I researched, and I researched. I researched every corner of the internet, YouTube, and anywhere I can glean any sort of information until I found something. I discovered a pulley system called a fiddle block. The great thing about this particular pulley system is that it's designed for reducing the force needed for trucks, cars, or even a person to pull a heavy load through. Now, I don't exactly know the exact physics on how this thing works, but I do know a YouTuber that can explain it better than me. I'll link his video in the description below. This is my Lego version. It works on the same principles as the fiddle block mechanism. There are two fiddle blocks within the weapon. The first one is built into the actual weapon. The second fiddle block is part 1 of the sling carrier. This animation will show you how the string is looped through the pulleys of the fiddle block. This new design also has a gear reduction system hooked to a motor that's powered by 2 light bulb batteries. Which reminds me, I needed a lot of power for this build, and IMAR batteries just weren't gonna cut it. I needed more power! So I took two 1600 mAh 11.1 volt batteries and wired one battery positive terminal and the other negative terminal to a on-off switch. This makes it easy when I'm recharging the batteries. When I need to charge them, I can just turn off the switch and charge one light bulb at a time. It's a bit crude, but it works. I should also mention, I'm using the same trigger mechanism to release the sling and projectiles, just like in my last attempt. I'm not going to bother you with going into too much detail, mostly because it's not really that important. But to give you a basic rundown, it's a hinge-like system that consists of a right-angled Technic piece that's attached to a long Technic beam that's attached to a large part. Without going to any more detail, this part is responsible for blocking the projectiles and sling until the trigger gets pushed down by the bolt. With that said, I finally felt like I was getting somewhere. I finally felt like I was able, just maybe, able to get this finished and shown. One moment please, fellow infected psychopaths, I gotta get that. Hello? Hello! So, remember my last version, I couldn't figure out how to move the sling bolt forward? Well, history seems to really love repeating itself with me. The only difference is this time it's more mechanical than electrical. At first, I thought I could just use a string tied to the end of a sling carrier that loops through a pulley that's attached to its own reel spool. Unfortunately, it wasn't that simple. Let me explain. There are two spool reels. One pulls the sling carrier part 1 back, the other pulls it forward. Both are which connected to a gear reduction system, which is hooked up to a motor. The problem was the spool reel that pulled back is attached to a bigger gear, while the other spool reel is attached to a small gear. Due to this, the spools will have different speeds, causing the sling carrier part 1 to get stuck. I tried different gear combinations to try to correct this issue, but couldn't, just cause how the gearbox is designed. I did try other methods, hell, I even tried adding a motor attached to its own gear system on the end of the weapon hoping it will fix it, and that still didn't damn work. With that said, one solution did spread some good results. Rather than use a string and a motor to pull part 1 and part 2 forward when around a chamber, I will instead be using an elastic. At first, I used a rubber band, but I soon realized it wasn't strong enough. Not to mention, rubber bands have a tendency to wear and tear over time. Luckily, something already exists to suit my needs, and that's elastic nylon cord. This has been used before in my new models of OHOAS rifles, so I knew it would be strong enough and durable enough to solve my problem. And it worked! Too well. Unfortunately, when I solved one problem, another one slapped me straight in the face. The elastic nylon cord worked, but it was too much of an opposing force for the gearbox to handle. This caused the gearbox to bend and warp, or even sometimes tear itself apart. I did try to reinforce the gearbox with some extra Technic pieces, but it just made the weapon look overly bulky, even for my standards. Another issue was the guide rails. Remember, it uses the same type of guide rail system as in my other split bolt mechanism examples. Unfortunately, it uses brass rails. Now, some of you are probably thinking, okay, it uses brass rails. What's the big deal? Well, you see, the problem is that brass just isn't strong enough for this specific application. It's good for small-scale projects, just like the little terror pistol, but in large scale, with this big of a opposing force caused by the elastic, it causes the guide rails to bend and warp. With everything I said, I decided to call it quits and completely redesign and remake the weapon from scratch, rather than continue to fight this losing battle. However, even though the build wasn't a full success, it still wasn't a complete failure unlike last time. The system did have some positive, I was on the right track, but the system did need some heavy improvements. But with that said, that's all that we have today for this class of Arsenal. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, hit or shoot the notification bell. Also, be sure to check out my other videos. Until next time, see ya later, you psychopaths.